Welcome to Papa Duke's Bedtime Stories. Thank you for joining me tonight. I am Duke Pierce Reed, and I am the author and narrator of this story. Before we begin, tell me in the comments where you are joining me from tonight. Your presence inspires my imagination. There are always new stories to write. If this story captivates you, like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Every interaction keeps the creative fires burning in me, and I thank you in advance. Now, let this tale unfold. Episode 2, Bedlam, a Wychwood ghost story. Emily sat at her favored perch by the window, the glass dim with soot, the world beyond veiled by perpetual fog. She clutched a folded scrap of paper so tightly it creased her palm, as though it might vanish if she dared release it. Below, the livery court seethed with its usual murmur of hoofs and wheels, the hiss of steam, whispers carried in corners. The sight had always steadied her, but here even the ordinary seemed touched with secrecy. At Fairheather, words themselves were prisoners. Letters were not written, but smothered. Matron's hand fell heavy upon every scrap of ink. Real letters rarely left these walls. They were consumed in fire, replaced with honeyed counterfeits praising the asylum's Christian cheer, its kindly attendance, its nourishing meals. The saintly matron who held the purse strings always emerged from such forgeries burnished in glory. But Emily was not without weapons. She had an accomplice, an unseen hand among the staff, who slipped her words past matron's eye, carrying them into the wider world. Today her body weakened by the fresh bleeding and mottled with bruises she could not account for. She clung to that one hope, that her true letter would escape. Her strength ebbed that day. The bandage on her arm seeped scarlet, the mark of another clumsy bleeding. Always on her return to Fairheather, the lancet was waiting, its cut, they claimed, to purge her dark humors. Her body told another tale, shoulders and back mottled with bruises, one eye ringed in purple. Were they the relics of a seizure or of someone's cruelty while she lay helpless? She no longer trusted her own memory. 1790, Gloucester. The Wraith's vengeance began swiftly. It was less than 3 years after the ancient barrow had been torn open, its stones scattered like bones, its relics pocketed by greedy hands, its silence profaned, when Shipton was darkened by mourning. The soil Sir John had coveted so fiercely now demanded recompense. The twin girls, fragile blossoms not yet 3 years old, were the first to wither. Their sickness came suddenly. No physician could name it. Within days their bodies failed, and the nursery fell silent. Sir John, once so brash, dissolved into tears and drink. For 7 days he staggered between their bedsides, raving prayers to a God that would not listen. When the tiny coffins were lowered into the very earth he had desecrated, Sir John's own heart gave way. Before the next dawn, he was dead. The gossips were swift. Most said grief had killed him, that a father's heart could not endure such loss. Others whispered darker things, poison, perhaps, and Lady Jane's hand behind it. But Mother Shipton knew. She had warned them. disturb the grave of the ancient princess, and the guardian would rise. The wraith had only begun its work. Lady Jane, veiled in black, trembled not only for her sons, but for her place in the world. The funeral ended, the black horses departed, yet the house was not cleansed. Shadows clung to the corners, doors whispered in the draught, and the family crest itself seemed to hang heavier on the wall. Then came the question of inheritance. Sir John, scarcely 27 and in the full bloom of health, had left no will. He had believed there would be time enough for such trifles, that his strength was proof against mortality. Now his twin, Thomas, stood in the doorway of power. The estate watched him with hungry eyes. Yet Thomas astonished all. He renounced his claim, saying the baronetcy was not his to bear. Some saw humility, others suspected cowardice. He alone seemed to sense that the title itself was poisoned. And so it passed to the infant heir, little Johnny, proclaimed Sir John, 7th Baronet, even by his younger brother Georgie, G.C., that is, who stammered at the word lordship. Their mother sat silent, one hand resting on her swollen belly. She feared that the child in her womb, a child whose father lay in the churchyard, a child already marked by the thing her husband had awakened. Lady Jane feared that the wraith, roused from its long sleep, would not rest until it had claimed every last branch of her family tree. 1895, London. The candle guttered in Emily's room. She looked to the door, certain that something stood beyond it, something that had watched her kin fall, one by one, since the day the mound was torn apart. At Fairheather, she thought, there was no safety. Here the shadow would claim her too. She finished the note and folded it with care, tucking the edges into a precise square so that only the forwarding address was visible. Clutching the letter to her chest, Emily waited for the skycoat who had become her secret ally, Mr. Noddy. He was one of the two colossal attendants in the director's train, men from India who wore identical turbans and livery. Both bore the name Singh, and so, to spare himself confusion, the director decreed that one should be called Singh and the other Noddy. Their duties were as absurd as their renaming. Singh trailed the director with a folding chair, ever ready to seat the corpulent master. Noddy carried the atomizer, filling the air with clouds of scent to shield the director from the effluvia of Fairheather. The director, chief physician of that dismal place, might have been stirred by compassion, or at least by some echo of the Hippocratic oath. But such motives never touched him. He thrived instead on avarice and cruelty, a creature in league with a cabal of confidence men who had converted Fairheather into a receptacle facade for fleecing the wealthy of their inconvenient kin. Criminals, too, those deemed unsuitable for the jail, were delivered here, swallowed up as the director's special projects. Emily had trusted Noddy ever since the day he carried a butterfly, alighted on his sleeve, carefully to her window. He had known of her fondness, had thought of her, and she had been moved. From then on he spoke with her when he could, and she in turn confided in him. Yet this morning he had not passed as he usually did, and her unease grew. Would her note remain unsent? Then came the rattle of keys. The door opened. Not Nadia alone, but both attendants entered, escorting the monstrous figure of Director Dr. Posthumous Saintsmith. He drifted into the day room like some fever dream spirit, clad in silks of shrieking hues, face obscured by a ghastly mask, a polished plank jutting from his skull on which a mirror reflected back the terror of all who dared meet his gaze. His new amusement was borrowed from the Mikado at the Savoy, and he now tormented his charges in grotesque pantomime, his long blue nail singling out the wretches while he sang, hoarse and tuneless, "Willow, willow, willow, tit willow." Even without the costume he was ambiguous, monstrous, neither quite man nor woman, corpulent flesh disguising all trace of humanity. Nadi's eyes flicked to Emily, a warning. Was she discovered? Did he know of the letter? She pressed it tighter behind her back. The director's voice roiled in chant of mock executions. Decapitation, disembowelment, molten lead, as he singled out one trembling soul. Emily's body betrayed her with a shudder, a warmth spreading between her skirts. Then, mercifully, a diversion. Another patient cried out, "You sprayed my eyes, you damned turban barnacle!" Noddy, quick and subtle, had turned his atomizer upon the man. The director seized upon the excuse, swelling with delight, mask looming, mirror forcing the victim to collapse in terror before being dragged to the dreaded quiet room. The matron appeared, black patents squeaking, eyes sweeping the chamber like a scythe. If the director was grotesque, she was pure malice. The very walls seemed to shrink as she surveyed the room. With a curt announcement of a new patient's imminent arrival, she vanished, leaving dread behind. From his makeshift stage, the director proclaimed the rules. No one was to speak to the newcomer, nor give him any tool or implement. His words pressed upon the room like a curse. Emily's heart raced. Noddy passed near her, misting the air, and with a deft motion plucked the folded note from her hand. Relief surged through her as he moved on, the letter secreted away. Moments later, the sound of hooves echoed below her window. She leaned out to see the arrival, a prison wagon, bolts and chains rattling as the doors were forced open. From within, the jailers drew out not a man, but a burden lashed to a wheelbarrow, a figure bound in a straitjacket, gagged with a metal bit like some beast. His eyes lifted skyward and fixed upon Emily's own. She could not look away. When at last he was wheeled through the alley door, the day room fell silent again. The matron returned, warning them in her iron tone. The new one was not to be addressed, under penalty of severe punishment. A patient dared ask his name. She replied coldly, "It is the man of many faces and no names. That is all you need to know." Emily, trembling, still clung to her hope. She dared to ask whether Professor Wickens had arranged her release at last. The matron's nostrils flared. Her silence was answer enough. The room exhaled when she left, resuming its nervous chatter. Emily slumped into her seat by the window, whispering a private wager to herself. If she could glimpse a blue butterfly, Wickens would come. But no blue butterfly came, only the memory of the shadow across the courtyard glass. Then the squeal of hinges. Heads turned. The new patient entered. The room recoiled like fish from a circling shark as he crossed the floor, his gaze devouring every corner. Emily fixed her eyes to the street below. He was not Wickens. She told herself she would not look, but she felt the weight of him, and when she did glance back, he was beside her. The new one sat down on her window seat. Neither spoke a word. She dared not shift, though every nerve screamed at his nearness. The new one sat motionless, bound no longer by straps, yet caged within an aura of menace, his eyes pale and unblinking. Emily tried to steady her breath, but her gaze betrayed her, sliding toward the barred window of the wagon below. The hands were still there, bony, grasping, impossibly so. And between those crooked fingers, the wraith's face emerged again, thin as mist, eyes black hollows that sought her out with dreadful patience. Her pulse shuddered. How could it remain when the man was already here, seated beside her? Unless the shadow was not his double, but his master, drawn through the breach of Wychwood's mound, fastening itself to him like a parasite. The newcomer shifted, just enough for the leather of his restraints to whisper. His head turned fractionally, and though he did not meet her eye, Emily felt the room tilt, as though the very air bent toward him. She folded her hands tightly in her lap, fingernails biting her skin. If she spoke, if she broke the silence, would the shadow slip free into her? Still, she sensed the famous murmur, words that could not have been uttered, yet curled like smoke into her ear. You are mine already. This ends episode 2. I hope this episode of Bedlam, a Wychwood ghost story, has enthralled you, dear listener, and brings you back for the next. Were you surprised by the plot twists? Or did you expect something altogether different? Share your thoughts below. The comments are always helpful, and I really do enjoy reading them. If this Wychwood ghost story captivates you, please like and subscribe to Papa Duke's Bedtime Stories for more, written and narrated by me, Duke Pierce Reed. You can purchase digital copies of most of my books online, from Apple Books, Amazon Kindle, Barnes & Noble, Nook, Kobo Rakuten, and dozens of fine online shops worldwide. Thank you for joining me tonight.